In the heart of every parent, there is a sacred promisia vow to protect, to nurture, to love unconditionally. It is the most fundamental bond in nature, the bedrock of our humanity. But what happens when that bond shatters? What happens when the hands that are meant to soothe are the ones that inflict the deepest harm? Today, we explore a case that defies all understanding, a story so dark it forced an entire community to question everything they thought they knew about a mother's love. We're going to uncover the story of a beloved preschool teacher, a woman entrusted with the care of innocent lives, who committed the ultimate act of betrayal against her own child. This is a story about a chilling deception, a twisted love, and a crime that stunned even the most hardened investigators. Before we delve into this harrowing case, take a moment to click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories we uncover here, as we seek to understand the shadows that lurk behind the most ordinary of faces. The town of Maple Creek, Vermont, was a postcard brought to life. Nestled in a valley carved by ancient glaciers, it was a place where white church steeples pierced the crisp blue sky, and the changing of the seasons was a communal event. Autumn was its finest hour. A riot of crimson and gold cascaded down the mountainsides, and the air carried the sweet, earthy scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. It was a town that prided itself on safety, on community, on the simple, wholesome goodness of its people. And at the heart of that wholesome image was Sarah Jenkins. To the residents of Maple Creek, Sarah was more than just a preschool teacher at the Little Sprouts Academy. She was an institution. With her perpetually kind eyes, a warm smile that could soothe the most terrified toddler, and a seemingly endless well of patience, she was the platonic ideal of a caregiver. Parents vied to get their children into her classroom, the Sunshine Room, where she cultivated an environment of gentle learning and creative play. She remembered every child's birthday, knew their favorite dinosaur, and could coax a smile from the shyest of souls. Her life seemed to be an open book, its pages filled with finger paintings, wholesome lullabies, and the innocent laughter of children. The centerpiece of her idyllic life was her 5-year-old son, Leo. He was a miniature replica of his mother, possessing the same warm brown eyes and an infectious, gap-toothed grin. Leo was a bright, energetic boy, full of endless questions about the world and a love for building towering Lego castles that inevitably met a Godzilla-like demise at his own hands. He was a fixture in the town, often seen holding his mother's hand as they visited the farmer's market on Saturdays or picked out books at the local library. Their bond was, by all accounts, perfect. He was her little shadow, her sunshine boy, as she so often called him. To see them together was to witness a portrait of maternal devotion. Sarah's life was her son. Her son's world was his mother. It was a simple, beautiful equation that everyone in Maple Creek understood and admired. The illusion was so complete, so meticulously crafted, that no one noticed the first hairline crack when it appeared. It arrived in the form of a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was new to Maple Creek, a transplant from the city who had bought the old, slightly neglected Victorian house at the end of Sarah's Street. He was a stark contrast to the flannel and work boots aesthetic of the local men. He was tall and lean, with sharp, angular features, dark hair he kept artfully disheveled, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, a profession that seemed exotic and vaguely glamorous to the townsfolk. He was enigmatic, possessing a quiet, brooding intensity that many found captivating. Their first meeting was cinematic in its cliché. Sarah was struggling with a flat tire on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Leo strapped in his car seat, growing fussy. Marcus, out for a jog despite the downpour, appeared as if from nowhere. He didn't just change the tire. He did it with a fluid, effortless grace, his designer jacket getting soaked while he chatted easily with her, his gaze lingering just a moment too long, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Leo's father, a kind but unexciting man named Tom, had been out of the picture for 3 years, having moved to the West Coast after a painfully amicable divorce. Sarah's life since had been a quiet, orderly affair, a world built for two. Marcus Thorne was a disruption, a sudden, unexpected splash of vibrant, dangerous color in her pastel world. Their relationship blossomed quickly, with an intensity that seemed out of place in the slow-paced town. He would meet her after she finished at Little Sprouts, leaning against his sleek, dark sedan, a stark contrast to the minivans and SUVs that filled the parking lot. He brought her coffee, single-origin brews she'd never heard of. He took her on dates to a new, trendy restaurant in the next town over, a place with low lighting and expensive wine. He spoke of art, of travel, of a life beyond the predictable rhythms of Maple Creek. He listened to her, not just about her day with the children, but about her own forgotten dreams, the person she was before she became Leo's mom. For Sarah, it was intoxicating. Marcus awakened a part of her she thought had long since gone dormant. He made her feel like a woman again, not just a mother and a teacher. She started wearing her hair down, swapping her sensible flats for stylish boots, and a flush of color was ever present on her cheeks. Her friends at the school noticed, teasing her good-naturedly. "Someone's got a secret," they'd whisper, and Sarah would just smile. A shy, private smile that held a universe of new feelings. But there was a subtle shift that went largely unnoticed. The perfect portrait of mother and son began to change, the composition subtly altered. Initially, Marcus was wonderful with Leo. He'd crouch down to the boy's level, discussing the structural integrity of a Lego fortress with mock seriousness or dazzling him with a simple magic trick. He bought him expensive, intricate toys that Sarah would never have considered. Leo, in his innocent way, was smitten at first. "Marcus is my friend," he would declare proudly. The cracks began to show in private, away from the prying eyes of the town. The change was in Marcus's gaze. When Leo would interrupt their conversations, a flicker of something cold annoyance, impatience would cross Marcus's face before being swiftly replaced by a charming smile. The first time Sarah saw it, she dismissed it. "He's just not used to kids," she told herself. Then came the comments, delivered like casual observations, wrapped in the language of concern. "He's a great kid, Sarah. So much energy," he said one evening, as Leo raced around the living room, making airplane noises. The emphasis on energy made it sound like a diagnosis. Another time, after a particularly trying bedtime routine where Leo had begged for one more story, one more glass of water, Marcus had put his arm around her, pulling her close. "You must be exhausted," he murmured into her hair. "You give so much of yourself to him, to all the kids. When do you get to just be you?" The questions were insidious, planting seeds of a discontent Sarah hadn't even known she possessed. He never overtly criticized Leo. Instead, he framed the boy as a responsibility, a limitation. He spoke of their future, a future of spontaneous trips to Europe, of lazy Sunday mornings with no obligations, of a life of adult passion and freedom. It was a beautiful, seductive fantasy, and in that fantasy, there was no room for a 5-year-old boy. Leo, her sunshine boy, was slowly being recast in her mind as the anchor holding her back from this dazzling new life. Sarah's behavior began to fray at the edges. At school, she was still the perfect Mrs. Jenkins, but a new tension hummed beneath the surface. A colleague might notice her staring out the window, her mind a million miles away, a faint, dreamy smile on her face. Or they might see her snap with uncharacteristic sharpness when a child spilled paint on the floor, her apology afterward just a little too flustered. Her interactions with Leo became strained. The easy, flowing river of their love was now punctuated by jagged rocks of impatience. She started insisting he play in his room more often, telling him, "The adults need to talk." The nightly ritual of 3 bedtime stories was shortened to 1, and then sometimes none at all, with a hurried, distracted kiss on the forehead as a substitute. Leo, with the unerring sensitivity of a child, felt the shift. He began to act out. Tantrums became more frequent. He started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done in over a year. Instead of meeting his distress with the patience she was famous for, Sarah saw it through a new lens, one crafted by Marcus. She saw it as manipulation, as a demand for attention, as another obstacle. "He's just testing you," Marcus would say, his voice a low, reasonable hum. He knows he's not the center of your world anymore, and he's fighting it. You have to show him you won't be controlled. One crisp October evening, the illusion cracked wide open. Marcus had planned a romantic dinner at Sarah's house. He'd brought expensive steak and a bottle of red wine that cost more than her weekly grocery bill. He was in the middle of telling her about a potential client in Paris, painting a picture of them walking along the Seine, when Leo, who was supposed to be asleep, padded into the dining room, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. "Mommy, I had a bad dream," he whimpered, his lower lip trembling. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus sighed. It was a soft sound, but it filled the room with a heavy, cold disappointment. "This is exactly what I mean, Sarah," he said, not looking at Leo, but at her. "He can't let you have one evening to yourself. He's just a child, Marcus." "He had a nightmare," Sarah said, her voice defensive. "It's always something," Marcus replied, swirling the wine in his glass. "A nightmare. Tummy ache. A monster in the closet. Don't you see the pattern? It's a bid for control. As long as he knows he can interrupt, as long as he knows he comes first, we can never truly have our own life." Leo, standing in the doorway, began to cry softly, confused by the tension, frightened by the coldness in the man's voice. "Leo, go back to bed. Now," Sarah said. Her tone was sharp, devoid of its usual warmth. "But the monster," he sobbed. "There are no monsters," she snapped, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Go to bed. Do not get out of it again." The look of stunned terror on her son's face was a physical blow. She saw his small shoulders slump, his little body turn and shuffle back down the hallway. She heard the soft click of his bedroom door. For a moment, a wave of guilt so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. "What am I doing? That's my baby." But then she turned and saw Marcus, his expression unreadable. He walked over to her, took her in his arms, and tilted her chin up. "I know that was hard," he whispered, "but it was necessary. You have to set boundaries. For your sake. For our sake." He kissed her, a long, deep kiss that tasted of wine and promises. And as he held her, the image of her son's terrified face began to fade, replaced by the glittering fantasy of Paris, of freedom, of a life where she was Sarah first and a mother second. That night she made a choice. She chose the fantasy, and in doing so, she sealed her son's fate. The final, terrible crack had formed, right through the heart of the perfect mother from Maple Creek. The portrait was irrevocably broken. All that was left was for it to fall. The 911 call came in at 6:42 a.m. on a bitterly cold Tuesday morning in early November. The voice on the line was frantic, choked with a hysteria that was chillingly authentic. It was Sarah Jenkins. "My son. He's gone. I went to wake him up for school and he's not in his bed. The back door is open. Oh my God, he's gone." Within minutes, the quiet, tree-lined street was a chaotic tableau of flashing red and blue lights. The Maple Creek Police Department, accustomed to dealing with minor traffic violations and the occasional bout of teenage vandalism, descended on the small, tidy house with a gravity reserved for the gravest of fears: a missing child. Detective Isabella Rossi arrived on the scene just as the sun was beginning to cast a weak, watery light over the frost-covered lawns. Rossi, a 15-year veteran of the state police before transferring to this quiet town for a change of pace, felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. A missing 5-year-old on a morning when the temperature had dipped below freezing was a nightmare scenario. She found Sarah in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, her body racked with violent shivers that had little to do with the cold. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed utterly genuine. She clutched a small, worn teddy bear to her chest. Leo's favorite. Marcus Thorne was by her side, his arm wrapped protectively around her, his own face a mask of grave concern. He was the one who answered most of Rossi's initial questions, his voice low and steady, a calm anchor in Sarah's storm of panic. Sarah's story was simple and horrifying. She had put Leo to bed around 8 p.m. She and Marcus had watched a movie and she'd fallen asleep on the couch. Marcus had woken her, helped her to bed around 11 p.m., and then left to go home. She had slept soundly, exhausted from the week. When her alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., she went to wake Leo, only to find his bed empty. A frantic search of the house revealed the back door, which led to the wooded area behind their property, was slightly ajar. Leo was gone. He must have woken up. Maybe he had a nightmare and got confused, Sarah sobbed, burying her face in Marcus's shoulder. He would never wander off. He knows not to, but he was wearing his blue pajamas. They're so thin. He'll be so cold. Rossi listened, her expression empathetic, but her mind was already working, cataloging details, noting inconsistencies. The back door, a heavy wooden thing with a deadbolt, was ajar. Would a 5-year-old be able to unlock it? Possibly. But why? The house was warm. His bed was safe. And why would he go out into the freezing darkness? The search began immediately. Police officers, then volunteer firefighters, and soon, dozens of concerned townspeople began a systematic sweep of the woods behind the house. News crews arrived, their vans lining the street, turning a private tragedy into a public spectacle. The community rallied as small communities do. Parents from Little Sprouts Academy brought casseroles and thermoses of hot coffee, their faces etched with fear. This wasn't supposed to happen in Maple Creek. Not to Sarah Jenkins, the woman who cared for all their children as if they were her own. Detective Rossi watched Sarah through the window. She saw her accept the condolences, her performance of the grieving mother flawless. But Rossi, a student of human behavior, saw something else in the brief, unguarded moments. She saw the way Sarah's eyes would occasionally drift towards the woods, not with the frantic hope of a mother searching for her child, but with a strange, unnerving stillness. She noted how she leaned on Marcus, letting him be her voice, her shield. The first 24 hours were critical, and they yielded nothing. The search turned up no sign of Leo. No footprints in the hardened, frosty ground. No scrap of blue pajama fabric snagged on a branch. It was as if the boy had vanished into thin air. Rossi's investigation turned from the woods to the house, to the people inside it. She conducted formal interviews with Sarah and Marcus separately. Sarah's interview was a maelstrom of tears and fragmented sentences. She recounted the previous evening, her story consistent with what she'd told them at the house. Rossi asked about Leo. Was he a happy child? Did he have any problems? He was my sunshine boy, Sarah wept. Always so happy. He loved school. He loved his friends. Everyone loved Leo. But when Rossi pressed for details about the last few weeks, Sarah's answers became vague. Had his behavior changed at all? Any recent tantrums? Bedwetting? Sarah's hand, clutching a tissue, tightened. He's a 5-year-old boy, she said, a slight edge to her voice. They have their moments. It was nothing. Marcus's interview was a different story. He was calm, collected, and articulate. He painted a picture of himself as the supportive partner, trying to help Sarah navigate the stresses of single motherhood. He corroborated Sarah's timeline of the previous night perfectly. Almost too perfectly. Did you notice any changes in Leo recently? Rossi asked, her gaze steady. Marcus hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. I don't want to speak ill of the boy, especially now, he began, his tone somber. But yes, he had become difficult, very possessive of Sarah. He would throw these terrible tantrums whenever she and I wanted some time alone. I think the divorce was harder on him than she wanted to admit. He was subtly, skillfully, painting Leo not as a victim, but as a troubled child, a source of friction. He was providing a motive, wrapped in a package of sympathetic concern. The first major break in the case came from an unlikely source, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. Mrs. Gable was a light sleeper and an insomniac. She told the uniformed officer who canvassed the neighborhood that she'd been woken by a car around 2:30 a.m. It wasn't an unusual sound, but this car had stopped, its engine idling, for nearly 10 minutes right in front of Sarah Jenkins's driveway. She recognized the car. It was that dark, fancy sedan the new fellow, Marcus, drove. She was certain of the time because she'd looked at her glowing alarm clock. When Rossi confronted Marcus with this information, a flicker of something, not panic, but calculation crossed his face. "Yes, that's right," he said smoothly. "I left Sarah's around 11, but I realized I'd left my portfolio in the car. I had an early deadline, so I drove back to get it. I didn't want to wake Sarah, so I just grabbed it and worked in the car for a few minutes, getting my thoughts in order before I drove home." It was a plausible explanation, but Rossi's gut told her it was a lie. Why would he sit in his car in the freezing cold when his own warm house was just down the street? The search for Leo entered its third day. The hope that had buoyed the community was curdling into a dark, collective dread. The focus of the search shifted to the old quarry pond, a deep, cold body of water a few miles into the woods. It was a place kids were warned to stay away from, and it was there that they found him. A state police diver, submerged in the murky, frigid water, saw a flash of blue. Leo was found near the edge of the pond, his small body tangled in the weeds beneath the surface. There were no visible signs of a struggle, but a small, dark bruise was forming on his temple. He was still wearing his blue pajamas. The news shattered Maple Creek. The collective grief was a palpable thing, a heavy shroud that fell over the town. At the center of it all was Sarah Jenkins, now the bereaved mother, whose wails of anguish upon hearing the news were so raw, so primal, that even the most stoic officers had to look away. But for Detective Rossi, grief was an emotion she had to put aside. The discovery of Leo's body changed the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide. The medical examiner's initial report confirmed her suspicions. The cause of death was not drowning. There was very little water in Leo's lungs. He had been dead before he entered the water. The cause was asphyxiation, and the bruise on his temple was consistent with a blow that would have rendered him unconscious. Rossi now had a murder victim, and her instincts, which had been screaming at her from the beginning, were now focused squarely on one person: the boy's mother. The pieces began to fall into place with chilling speed. A forensic sweep of Sarah's house, which she had willingly allowed when Leo was still missing, yielded a damning piece of evidence. In the trunk of her car, tucked under the spare tire, crime scene technicians found a child's blanket. It was damp, and analysis found traces of pond sediment and a single strand of Leo's hair. More importantly, it tested positive for a significant amount of chloroform. Rossi brought Sarah Jenkins back to the station. This time, it wasn't for a victim interview. She sat across from her in the stark, gray interview room. The box of tissues was on the table between them, but Sarah wasn't crying anymore. Her face was a blank, emotionless mask. "We found a blanket in your car, Sarah," Rossi began, her voice quiet but firm. "It had chloroform on it, and sediment from the quarry pond. The same pond where we found your son." Sarah stared at a spot on the wall behind Rossi's head. She didn't speak. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Gable, saw Marcus's car outside your house at 2:30 a.m., Rossi continued, laying out the pieces. "He says he came back for a portfolio. We think he came back for something else. We think he came back to help you." Still silence. "You wanted a new life, Sarah?" Rossi pressed, her voice softening slightly. "A life with him. A life without responsibilities. A life without Leo. He saw your son as an obstacle, didn't he? And he convinced you to see him that way, too." For the first time, Sarah's gaze shifted. She looked at Rossi, and in her eyes, there was not grief, not sadness, but a flicker of cold, hard resentment. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice raspy. "You don't know what it's like to be trapped. He was always there, always needing something. I just wanted to be free." The confession, when it came, was not a torrent of guilt, but a cold, methodical recitation of events. She had crushed a sleeping pill into his bedtime apple juice. When he was sound asleep, she used the chloroformed online weeks before under the guise of a science project, for her class to ensure he wouldn't wake. She carried her son's limp body to her car, but she couldn't bring herself to drive to the quarry alone. She had called Marcus, panicked, But already too deep in the fantasy he'd sold her, he had agreed to help. He met her, and together they drove to the quarry. Together they had committed the final, unthinkable act. He was her anchor, but he was also her accomplice. As the handcuffs clicked around Sarah Jenkins's wrists, the sound echoed in the sterile room. The tears of the grieving mother had dried, and what was left was a terrifying void. The portrait of the perfect mother was not just broken. It was ground into dust, revealing the monstrous image that had been hiding beneath it all along. The trial of Sarah Jenkins and Marcus Thorne, which began the following spring, was not just a legal proceeding. It was an exorcism for the town of Maple Creek. The community packed the pews of the old stone courthouse every day, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound sorrow. They were there to witness the unmasking, to try and reconcile the woman they thought they knew, the gentle, nurturing Mrs. Jenkins, with the cold-eyed defendant sitting beside her lawyer. The prosecution, led by a sharp, methodical district attorney named Alistair Finch, laid out a case that was both heartbreaking and horrifying. He began with the idyllic portrait of Sarah and Leo, using photos from her own social media, the two of them smiling at a pumpkin patch, baking cookies, reading a book. "This," Finch said to the jury, his voice resonating with quiet power, "is the life that was stolen, not by a stranger in the night, not by a random act of violence, but by the very person who was supposed to be its fiercest protector." The evidence was overwhelming. The forensic analysis of the blanket, the damning testimony of Mrs. Gable, the digital trail of Sarah's online purchase of chloroform. Finch presented text messages between Sarah and Marcus from the weeks leading up to the murder. They were filled with declarations of love and desire, but woven throughout were darker threads. "Marcus, another weekend stuck here. Wish it was just you and me on a beach somewhere." Sarah, "Me too. It's so hard to get away." Marcus, "One day it will be. Promise. No distractions. Just us. A distraction." That's what Leo had become. The prosecution called parents from Little Sprouts Academy to the stand. One after another, they spoke of the Sarah they knew, their testimony painting a picture of her saintly reputation, which only made the subsequent revelations more shocking. Then, Finch called one of Sarah's teaching assistants, a young woman who, through tears, recounted Sarah's growing impatience and distraction in her final weeks at the school. "She seemed distant," the assistant whispered, "like her mind was somewhere else. She wasn't herself." The trial's most dramatic moments came when Marcus Thorne, in a bid for a lighter sentence, agreed to testify against Sarah. He walked to the stand, avoiding her gaze, his handsome face now gaunt and shadowed. His testimony was a masterful performance of self-preservation. He portrayed himself as a man who had fallen in love with a woman who was becoming increasingly unstable, buckling under the pressure of single motherhood. "Did Sarah Jenkins ever talk to you about her son being a burden?" Finch asked. "She would say things," Marcus said, his voice heavy with feigned regret. "That she loved him, of course, but that she felt trapped. That she dreamt of a life where she could be free. I never thought she meant this. I thought it was just talk." He lied with breathtaking ease. He claimed she had called him that night in a panic, telling him Leo had had a terrible accident. He said he had only helped her dispose of the body because he was scared, manipulated by her hysteria, and in shock. He was painting himself as a victim, another soul caught in Sarah Jenkins's web. Throughout his testimony, Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She watched him, her expression unreadable. There was no outburst, no denial. It was as if she were watching a play in which she was merely a character, her fate already written. When it was the defense's turn, Sarah's court-appointed lawyer attempted to build a case around a narrative of diminished capacity, arguing that Marcus had psychologically manipulated a vulnerable, lonely woman, twisting her mind until she was no longer in control of her actions. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that Sarah exhibited signs of dependent personality disorder, making her susceptible to the influence of a dominant figure like Marcus. But any sympathy this strategy might have generated was obliterated when the prosecution played the audio of Sarah's confession. Hearing her cold, detached voice describe how she had drugged her own son, how she had held the chloroform-soaked cloth, how she had carried his small, lifeless body to the carrot was monstrous. In that moment, she was not a victim. She was a killer. The sound of a juror's choked sob was the only sound in the silent courtroom. The final act belonged to Sarah herself. Against her lawyer's advice, she chose to take the stand. The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment for remorse, for an explanation, for a plea for understanding. But it never came. Sarah Jenkins spoke in a low, steady monotone. She did not weep. She did not rage. She calmly corrected minor details of the prosecution's timeline, as if discussing a grocery list. When her own lawyer asked her if she regretted what she had done, she paused for a long, agonizing moment. She turned her head slightly and looked at the jury. "I regret that he's gone," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "But what I really regret is the quiet. I didn't know the quiet would be so loud." It was a chilling, incomprehensible statement that sealed her fate more surely than any piece of evidence. She wasn't mourning her son. She was mourning the failure of her fantasy. The silence she had craved, the freedom she had killed for, had turned into its own kind of prison. The jury's deliberation was short. They found Marcus Thorne guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. But for Sarah Jenkins, the verdict was swift and absolute: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, a man who had presided over the county's darkest crimes for 3 decades, looked at Sarah as he delivered her sentence. "There is a place in our society for monsters," he said, his voice trembling with a barely controlled fury. "But we have always held onto the belief that a mother's arms are the one place a child is safe from them. You have shattered that belief. You have not just taken a life. You have committed an act against nature itself." He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led from the courtroom, she glanced one last time at the people of Maple Creek, her face a blank canvas. There was no remorse, no fear, no sadness. There was only emptiness. The aftermath of the trial left a permanent scar on the town. The Little Sprouts Academy closed its Sunshine Room, unable to erase the stain of what had happened there. The Jenkins house was sold, but it remained empty, a silent monument to the tragedy. The story became a cautionary tale, a dark local legend whispered among parents. Detective Rossi never forgot the case. She kept a school picture of Leo, his gap-toothed, joyful grin pinned to the bulletin board in her office. It was a reminder, she said, that evil doesn't always come with a monstrous face. Sometimes, it wears a kind smile and volunteers for the PDA. In the end, Sarah Jenkins got the quiet she so desperately craved. The endless, sterile quiet of a maximum security prison cell. There, she was no longer a mother, no longer a teacher. She was just an inmate, a number. But in the dead of night, in the suffocating silence, the residents of Maple Creek liked to imagine that she finally heard the one sound she could never escape. The faint, phantom laughter of the little boy she had called her Sunshine, before she willingly stepped into the dark.